Imagine the sky trembling, not from thunder, but from something colder, stranger. A silence so deep it hurt the ears. A glow that wasn't fire, yet pulsed like it lived. The world distracted by disaster, while something older, something watching, slipped quietly through the smoke. No sirens for this. No headlines. Just 7 lights in the dusk, gliding without sound, over fields that were never meant to witness what they saw. And beneath it all, a secret buried in the dry soil of Elverta, too real to forget, too strange to explain. Don't forget to like and share this story with your friends or closest family members to help spread awareness and caution through storytelling. Now, let's continue with the story. The air over Sacramento was thick that week. The sand fire, barely contained, roared across Northern California's forest lines. News anchors spoke in panicked tones. Evacuation orders were spreading like wind-blown embers. Helicopters roared low, dipping water buckets into the river, while planes traced arcs of fire retardant across red-tinted skies. But just north of the city, in a place the maps barely bothered with, Elverta, the nights had turned strange in a quieter way. It started with the smell. Retired schoolteacher Alice Moreno noticed it first. On the night of July 18th, just past 9:30, she stepped outside her porch to water the potted succulents she refused to abandon, even during fire season. The air should have smelled like smoke. Instead, it was metallic, cold despite the heat, like wet coins and ozone. She glanced up. The stars were mostly hidden behind smoke, but there, above the fallow alfalfa field east of her property, floated a formation of peach-colored orbs. Not flickering, not blazing, just gliding, smooth and steady, too perfect for anything she'd ever seen in 70 years of watching the sky. Across town, a delivery driver named Ray Sanders was on his final route of the night. His dashboard radio began to crackle. Not with static, but something else. Bursts of structured clicking. Almost rhythmic. Morse-like, but not quite. He looked out the windshield. The same lights, 6 or 7, maybe more, moved in sequence over the trees. He pulled over, stepped out of the truck, and watched. There was no sound, no wind, just pressure, a tightness in his chest and ears. The lights shifted shade slightly, almost like breathing. Then, without warning, they accelerated eastward and vanished into the haze. The next morning, the world had no space for stories like Ray's. Or Alice's. The news screamed of evacuation zones, destroyed homes, and exhausted firefighters. The local sheriff's office, when pressed, mentioned military drones. A dismissive nod. No follow-up. But whispers began anyway. Ham radio forums lit up with stories from that night. Operators picking up strange pulses in the 43-second range. Ultra-low frequency chirps that didn't align with any known transmitter. A retired engineer in Rio Linda described the signal as a symmetrical ripple, like a fingerprint echoing through static. Then came the incident no one could ignore. 3 days after the lights, UC Davis quietly dispatched a graduate researcher to Elverta. Her name was Laura Kim. Bright, focused, working under a professor known for fringe atmospheric studies. She took soil samples, air readings, radiation scans, and she found something. It would be months before anyone outside the lab knew, but Lara's field notes, later leaked anonymously, described a layered metallic fragment pulled from beneath the dry soil of the field. Foil-thin, but denser than aluminum. Bismuth bonded with magnesium-zinc layers in a pattern too precise for accidental metallurgy. The fragment emitted a residual electric field, even when isolated. That same night, her equipment recorded a local ion spike, negative ions in concentrations higher than those found after lightning strikes, but without any storm. It lasted only seconds, like something had tunneled through. The sample was removed. The lab never acknowledged it. Lara never spoke publicly again. But the radio pulses? They didn't stop. And in Elverta, the air hasn't smelled quite right since. July 22nd, 4 days after the lights, the sky over Elverta was clear for the first time that week. The fires had shifted westward. Smoke still lingered on the horizon, but the stars were returning, shy and pale, barely visible above the trembling lights of the grid. Ray Sanders hadn't been able to sleep since that night. He wasn't the paranoid type. But what he'd seen stayed with him, growing sharper instead of fading. The lights hadn't just moved, they had intention, coordination. And when they vanished, they didn't fly away. They blinked out like a curtain closed on a stage. At 10:12 p.m., he turned on his shortwave radio again. Not out of hope, just instinct. The pulse returned. A single burst. Then 43 seconds of silence. Another. It wasn't random. He jotted the times down. Synced a stopwatch. It was too perfect. No civilian signal ran at that interval, and no emergency frequencies were scheduled. He recorded it. Just clicks and low hums, barely audible, like breath caught in wires. Down the road, in an aging warehouse-turned-residence, Janice Ellis was having a harder time. Her 12-year-old daughter had begun sleepwalking. It started the night after the lights. The girl would stand by the kitchen window for hours, unmoving, whispering words that didn't belong in any known language. When Janice tried to wake her, she screamed in a tone that made the dog bark and the bulbs in the hallway flicker. 3 towns over, Professor Darren Koenig of UC Davis was listening to a voicemail from Laura Kim. It was time-stamped at 3 in the morning. Her voice was shaking, rushed. "They're not gone," she whispered. "It's not a residual field. It's live. It's listening." Then the line went silent. She didn't report to her lab that morning. Her apartment was found empty, the windows open despite the July heat, her laptop smashed and submerged in the bathtub. No signs of struggle. No footprints. No suicide note. No Lara. The university filed her as missing. Privately, her advisor hired a friend at Caltech to review the data she left behind. What they found was worse than expected. Beneath the signal's pulses, nested in the waveform, was a lower frequency, almost inaudible to human ears, but distinct when isolated. It was not noise. It was language. Patterned. Evolving. And at exactly 2:23 a.m. the night Lara disappeared, that frequency doubled in strength and repeated a 4-note sequence, repeating 21 times before falling back into static. The waveform matched no known encryption. No digital pattern. It was analog, like a vocal tone stretched across a wire. The Caltech associate, whose name was kept off record, later described it in one email. "It's not broadcasting. It's pinging." By the end of July, the field where the orbs had been seen was quietly fenced off. The county claimed it was due to contamination from fire debris. But there was no fire damage. No ash. Just dry soil and an oddly circular depression in the alfalfa growth that satellites later confirmed had not been there a week prior. And still, the pulse continued. In truck cabs. In ham radios. In old TVs left on static mode in garages. 43 seconds. Always 43. Ray tried to share his recordings online, but they vanished. Posts were removed. Accounts flagged for potential disinformation. One user, a sound technician from Seattle, contacted him directly through encrypted chat. "This signal is being filtered in real time," the message read. "Not jammed, absorbed. Like it's being harvested." Ray never heard from that user again. But the static in his truck? It now had an echo. A faint one. A voice layered into the crackle. It said his name. He didn't sleep at all after that. August drifted in like a tired breath, but the tension in Elverta thickened. The town carried on, silent and suspicious, like something unseen was threading itself through the soil. The field, once open, wide, and sun-bleached, was now hidden behind chain-link fencing and tarp-lined panels that shuddered even when the wind was still. On August 2nd, at 6:07 in the morning, a boy named Mateo Campos took his bike too far off the main road. He was 10 years old, bored, and obsessed with YouTube conspiracy videos about alien metals and the Elverta lights. His mom, a single nurse working triple shifts in Sacramento, barely noticed when he slipped out before dawn. He ditched his bike near the irrigation canal and snuck through a loose panel in the fence. What he found wasn't just dirt. The depression in the field had deepened. It was no longer just a shape. It was a pattern. Concentric rings, as if something had pressed into the earth. Not heavy, but precise. The grass was not burned or broken. It had bent and re-rooted itself, following spiral curves in impossible symmetry. In the center, there was a shallow pit, no wider than a dining table, and lined with glassy soil hardened like it had been flash-melted. Mateo crouched to touch it. It was cold, and then he heard singing. Not loud, not human, not in any language he'd ever heard, but sweet, rising and falling like the wind through wires. It came from beneath the glass. He ran. Mateo didn't speak for 4 days. When he finally did, he said one sentence, quietly, to his older cousin who was watching him. They lived down there. That same evening, Janice Ellis's daughter, Sophie, vanished. Janice had left the kitchen only for a moment. When she returned, Sophie's chair was empty, the back door open. No footprints. No struggle. Only the faint smell of burnt ozone in the hall and a drawing left behind on the kitchen table. The picture was crude, made with red marker and crayon. It showed 7 peach-colored circles above a spiral field. In the center stood a stick figure with hair, Sophie, labeled in shaky letters, and under her feet were wavy lines, like sound waves or roots. Or tunnels. Police searched for 72 hours. Dogs found nothing. Helicopters scanned the field. No trace. By the 5th day, Ray Sanders had stopped going to work. He spent his time tracking the signal. It had changed. The 43-second interval still held. But now, within each burst, were tonal shifts. Variations too detailed to be accidental. And a low-frequency hum, barely perceptible, seemed to vibrate the furniture in his living room when the signal came through. When he played it backward, it formed an oscillating triangle wave, one that matched the pattern burned into Mateo's photograph of the field. Ray began to suffer migraines, bleeding from the ears, teeth vibrating at night, and dreams. He saw Sophie in them, standing in a corridor lit with that same peach glow. Her eyes were open, but blank. Her lips moved without sound. Behind her, silhouettes, tall, slender, shimmering, stood still, almost reverent, watching. The dreams ended the same way, every night, with Ray waking to find his radio tuned to the wrong frequency, and whispering, one word, remember. He stopped sleeping altogether. By mid-August, whispers grew louder online. A Reddit post about the girl in the field went viral, claiming that multiple children had gone missing in the Sacramento Valley under similar circumstances. It was taken down within hours. The author's account was suspended. A Discord server compiling sightings was suddenly emptied, its members reporting that their devices had crashed, accounts wiped clean. Ray kept recording. He bought an analog reel-to-reel recorder, bypassing anything connected to the internet. He etched the waveform patterns by hand. He found that if he slowed the signal down by a factor of 3.8, the pulses matched a known mathematical constant. Not random. Not coded. Structured. It was a form of instruction. He couldn't read it, but someone could. So he contacted Laura Kim's former advisor, the man who hadn't spoken publicly since her disappearance. And for the first time, someone responded with a warning. Do not decode the signal. Ray asked why. The reply came 5 minutes later. You'll hear them. But more importantly, they'll hear you. It arrived by mail. No return address, no postage mark. A thick manila envelope slid beneath Ray Sanders' door sometime after midnight, though he never heard a knock. Inside were 5 items. A photocopy of a UC Davis lab ID for Laura Kim, dated 2 days before she vanished. A thumb drive wrapped in foil. A short typewritten note reading, "For analog transfer only." A printed map with a single point circled in red, northeast of Elverta, just past the levee road. And a final sheet, yellowed and water-damaged, with one phrase typed in uppercase. Echo Protocol. Do not broadcast. Ray stared at the note until the sunrise sliced through his blinds. By 7 a.m., he'd locked the doors, unplugged every wireless device in the house, and retrieved the old reel-to-reel recorder from the basement. Still dusty from the garage sale where he'd bought it last year, just before the world changed. He inserted the thumb drive into an offline laptop, converted the file to analog, and began the transfer. It wasn't just a sound. It was a presence. The tape began with silence, but Ray could feel it. His fillings buzzed, the hairs on his arms stood like soldiers awaiting orders. Then came the layers. A soft, low droning, like thousands of insect wings moving just beneath hearing. Beneath that, a series of pulses, not in 43-second intervals this time, but faster, urgent, and woven through it all, a voice. Not words. Tones shaped like words. Rising, falling, rippling as if passing through liquid. It wasn't speech, it was an invitation. He ripped off the headphones, heart pounding. Something was wrong. His window panes were vibrating. The dog next door began howling. And his radio, unplugged, buzzed to life on its own. Across town, the sheriff's department received 2 calls from residents near the levee road, complaining of low sky noise and dizzy spells. A power outage rolled through the neighborhood grid 15 minutes later, affecting only 13 homes, including Ray's. He took the map and drove. The circled spot wasn't remote, just past the levee bend, nestled between 2 long-dead walnut groves. But something about it felt untouched. Ray parked and stepped carefully across the dry soil. Then he saw it. A perfectly round clearing, 10 meters wide. Not burned, not cleared, just absent. Grass and shrubs stopped at the edges like they were afraid to cross. In the center stood a single steel pole no taller than his chest, jutting from the ground with no base, no markings, impossibly smooth. At its top was a black orb. Dull, glassy, cold to the touch. Ray stood silently. His watch stopped. His ears rang. Then the pulse came, clearer than ever, vibrating through his sternum like a second heartbeat. In the following days, Ray stopped communicating. He wasn't missing. He was simply different. Friends said he stared through people. Didn't blink as often. Sometimes he would hum softly when no one else heard music. His house was darker. No screens, no clocks. Just notes, hundreds of them, scribbled across the walls in looping geometrical patterns. Spirals, cones, symbols that looked mathematical but weren't. One note stood out. The echo is not just a message. It is a memory. Not theirs. Ours. Meanwhile, more reports filtered into amateur radio boards. Strange pulses from rural Idaho, a frequency burst in Oregon, unexplained tonal sweeps recorded in British Columbia. All matching Elverta's signature. And in Rio Linda, a teenage girl developed spontaneous aphasia after walking through a neighborhood irrigation tunnel. Her CT scans showed patterns in her neural activity, oscillations shaped like language, but not human language. She could no longer speak, but she could hum the signal. In perfect rhythm. 43 seconds. Then one night, in late August, the levee pole vanished. No prints. No marks. No residue. And with it, the signal stopped for 72 hours. Until, on September 1st, the waveform returned. But now it carried new elements, sharper tones, layered harmonics, a rhythm that mirrored human speech, but echoed back in reverse, like a voice not just responding, but remembering. From the deep, and in the static between pulses, new sounds emerged. Breathing, steps, metal on stone, a door sliding open, and a voice, finally in English, whispered the words no one could trace. Phase 1 remembered. Begin retrieval. September rolled in with dry winds and cooler nights, but something deeper had shifted. In Elverta, the sky didn't look the same anymore. It was subtly wrong, too flat, too wide, and occasionally tinted with the faintest shade of peach just before dawn, like a memory trying to surface. Ray Sanders wasn't seen in public after the 1st of the month. His windows remained boarded. Deliveries were left at the gate, untouched. A faint humming could sometimes be heard from inside the house, but no one dared to knock. Until Officer Miguel Rivas, recently transferred from Yolo County, was sent to perform a welfare check after Ray failed to appear in court over an unresolved traffic incident. It was supposed to be routine. He never entered the house. He approached the porch, paused, and called dispatch. "I'm getting weird readings. My radio's going out. Static's too thick." Then silence. His body cam captured 37 seconds of distorted footage, the frame flickering, audio humming, then cutting to black. Rivas was found 4 hours later, wandering in a dry creek bed 5 miles west of the house. Barefoot, pupils dilated, whispering numbers that matched the waveform's echo cycle. He had no memory of what had happened. That same evening, reports began to pour in from across the Pacific Northwest. Fishermen off the Oregon coast recorded sonar anomalies, objects beneath the surface moving faster than known submersibles, emitting bursts of sound that matched the Elverta signal. Satellites monitoring magnetospheric data picked up localized disturbances directly above Northern California. The signal, previously isolated to ham radio bands and analog receivers, had changed medium. It was now appearing in fiber optic cables. A data center in Fremont experienced a 1-minute data echo, every internal message, email, and packet rebroadcasted exactly 43 seconds after original transmission. Unheard of, undocumented, and no one could explain it. But someone had anticipated it. Buried deep in the archives of UC Davis, on a server flagged for deletion, a string of encrypted documents began decrypting on their own. An automatic failsafe. Files left behind by Laura Kim, labeled only as Echo Retrieval Notes. Inside were voice memos, diagrams, coordinates. One stood out. Echo Node 3, Grid H17. Retrieval tunnel confirmed beneath Elverta field. Observation phase complete. Breach imminent. Prepare sensory isolation. Host frequency is ascending. No one knew how to respond, but someone already had. In a black SUV parked outside Sacramento International Airport, an unmarked team with Department of Energy credentials quietly reviewed the decrypted data. One man, older, with burns on both hands, whispered to his partner, "They're not returning. They're waking it up." He handed over a thin folder labeled only Operation Hollow Root. Inside was a hand-drawn map of the Elverta field, with 7 concentric circles, and a single marked center point labeled Origin Pulse. Beneath it, 3 handwritten phrases. A memory is not stored in the brain. The frequency is native to Earth. A human perception is the decoy. That night, something rose beneath the field. Residents reported a faint rumble around 2:18 a.m., not an earthquake. The motion was vertical, precise, like something unlocking. And in the exact moment that Ray's final reel-to-reel recorder stopped spinning, a surveillance camera on an abandoned grain silo facing the field caught a flicker, 7 lights, aligned in formation, emerging from the soil and lifting without dust, without heat. They didn't shoot skyward. They hovered, waiting. And then, as the wind picked up, a voice transmitted across every open channel, every frequency, every unused signal band. A child's voice. I remember now. Then silence. But only above. Beneath the earth, something had begun to move. Fluid, heavy, rhythmic, digging or rising. In the days that followed, 13 children across the Sacramento Valley began sleepwalking. They all stopped in their backyards, facing east, eyes open, mouths closed, and every 43 seconds, they breathed in unison. They called it a wave, not because it looked like water, but because of how it moved, slowly, then suddenly, and no one saw it coming until it had already passed. By the second week of September, the phenomenon was spreading, not through panic or chaos, but through the quiet things. Power surges in silent homes, glitches in smart speakers that never stopped listening, nightmares recorded by therapists in towns surrounding Elverta that matched, word for word, down to the second. The children who began sleepwalking no longer responded to their names. They functioned, eating, walking, even blinking, but with the stillness of puppets waiting for a string to be pulled. Medical scans showed no neurological damage, but their brains were active in ways never recorded, patterns looping like encrypted data signals, spiraling in perfect symmetry. Doctors didn't know what to call it. Ray Sanders had named it already. Harvesting. Inside his home, now stripped of furniture and covered floor to ceiling with chalk spirals, Ray had painted a single phrase above his bedroom door. They aren't looking for us. They're looking for what we carry. And beneath it, in much smaller lettering, they forgot themselves. We were built to remember them. FBI agents arrived at Ray's home on September 12th, responding to reports of a high-frequency pulse disrupting cellular towers in a 4-mile radius. When they entered, they found no trace of Ray, but every clock, every timer, every ticking object inside the house was frozen at 2:23 a.m. That was the same moment the 7th child, an 11-year-old named Noah Templeton, collapsed in his driveway after whispering the phrase, "I see the shapes now." He remained unconscious for 43 hours. When he woke, he drew a symbol. 7 rings. A spiral. A triangle wrapped in waveforms. And in the center, an eye with no pupil. The same symbol etched into the bismuth metal fragment found months earlier beneath the Elverta field. Laura Kim had seen it too. Her old lab notebook, decrypted with metadata hidden in the thumb drive Ray received, revealed more than just data. It contained transcripts of auditory hallucinations she began experiencing after handling the fragment. Voices in the frequency. Not threatening, not loud, just sad. She wrote, "They're not visitors. They're refugees. And we are their archive." Her final entry. "I no longer dream in language. I dream in memory. Memory that isn't mine." As the harvest spread, more data centers began experiencing micro-interruptions, milliseconds of information repeating out of sync, embedded with non-human patterns. When slowed down, these bursts formed sonic blueprints, maps not of places, but of thoughts, patterns that resembled collective memory clusters, libraries of encoded perception. And the static? It now carried faces. Visual researchers parsing the signal noticed that, when converted to spectrogram form, the frequency bore shape, features, faint outlines of people, rows of them, some adult, some child, eyes closed, heads tilted, not digital, not animated, photographic, images captured not by machines, but by memory. Some of the faces were identified. One matched Sophie Ellis, still missing since August. Another matched Laura Kim. Both looked peaceful, still, not asleep, stored. And that's when the name began to spread. The memory vault. Not a place. A process. The echo protocol was never a broadcast. It was a retrieval signal. A key turning in a lock. Designed not to make contact, but to reactivate. Not an invasion. Not abduction. A synchronization. The human brain, it seemed, could store more than thought. Deep in its neural folds lay dormant fragments, resonant signatures designed to awaken only when the right frequency passed through. And now it had. The old questions no longer mattered. Who were they? What did they want? The truth was simpler, terrifyingly so. They had once been us, or we had once been them. And in burying themselves across time, across Earth, in signals and symbols and songs and spirals, they had chosen to return, not with ships or weapons, but through us. We were the vaults, and the key had turned. In the final recording Ray left behind, salvaged from a rusted handheld tape deck found in a school locker 3 towns over, his voice is barely a whisper beneath the signal hum. They're not taking us. He pauses. We're giving ourselves back. Then, silence. No static. No signal. Just a soft breath. Then a click. Then 43 seconds later, another. September 19th. The sun rose behind a thin veil of pale orange, casting a sickly hue across Elverta's streets. Children walked to school in silence, their eyes unfocused, their steps synchronized. Mothers stood on porches, watching with tight throats. Somewhere beneath the morning routine, a collective hum pressed against the air, like the world was vibrating at a frequency only the body could hear. The harvest was accelerating. Hospitals across the Sacramento Valley reported surges in patients complaining of vertigo, tinnitus, and ghost thoughts, flashes of memories that didn't belong to them. A man in Woodland described vivid recollections of a desert city with black glass towers, though he'd never left California. A teenager in Davis awoke speaking a language no one could identify, her voice layered with a second tone echoing her words a half-beat later. And at the Elverta field, what locals now called the Vault Basin, a new pattern had appeared. The grass grew in glyphs, symbols too sharp to be natural, yet too alien to translate. Crop circle enthusiasts flooded the area. Most left within hours, suffering migraines and nausea. Drones sent over the basin lost signal. One crashed outright, its footage corrupted save for the final frame. 7 luminous orbs forming a perfect circle around a small figure at the center. It looked like a child. Back in Sacramento, Dr. Madeline Hu, a neurolinguist from UC Berkeley, arrived at the site under the guise of a climate research grant. In truth, she had been corresponding privately with Laura Kim before her disappearance, decoding patterns buried in the waveform data. Hu had discovered something no one else had. The 43-second signal was not a countdown. It was a sentence. Each pulse, each hum, each oscillation formed a grammatical sequence, not in spoken language, but cognitive structure. A grammar of thought. A syntax of perception. The vault was not just opening, it was writing. And the medium was us. She found Ray's wall diagrams replicated unconsciously by children who had never seen them. Drawn in sand, in notebooks, on steamed mirrors. Each spiral matched brainwave activity recorded during deep REM sleep. The vault wasn't taking minds. It was waking memories, ones never known, never lived, but somehow embedded in our neurology. Not dreams. Not visions. Downloads. Meanwhile, the 13 children at the center of the phenomenon were no longer speaking. They responded only to tone. When certain frequencies were played, replicas of the original echo signal, they hummed in perfect unison, their voices aligning in pitch and tempo. A choir of memory. Doctor Who managed to obtain a private recording. It lasted 3 minutes. The tones were beautiful, rising and folding like tides. But buried deep in the second layer, a voice spoke English. Come. Measured. Older than sound. We were shattered across the vessel of your species. A splinter in each cell, a shard in every mind. Memory is the body of the soul, and now the soul remembers its form. She played the recording for the governor's science task force. They confiscated her equipment within the hour. By the 21st, more children began drawing the vault sigil. 7 circles. 1 eye. Beneath it, a curved arc, previously dismissed as abstract. But when mirrored and overlaid with satellite coordinates, it matched the outline of an ancient glacial basin buried beneath the Elverta region. A formation older than recorded human history. The vault hadn't chosen Elverta by chance. It had always been there, dormant, waiting. And then the final change began. A humming across the nation, documented by thousands, swept through the airwaves, from analog to digital, from low band to satellite. It was global now. The vault had expanded. Signals were picked up in Brazil, Morocco, Eastern Russia. But only one place remained central. Elverta. The original basin began glowing faintly at night, visible only to infrared lenses. The spirals now spun slowly, like gears aligning in a great unseen machine. People reported lost time, visions, familiarity with languages they'd never learned. And in one final act, the children, now 21 in number, gathered at the edge of the basin. No one led them. They simply arrived. They stood in silence as the wind died, as birds vanished from the sky, as cell towers blinked out one by one. At precisely 2:23 a.m., the vault opened. There was no sound, no light, only the bending of gravity itself. Street signs warped toward the center, dust floated sideways, and even time seemed to hesitate. And in the middle of the basin, from the deepest spiral, something stepped forward. Not alien, not monstrous, familiar, too familiar. A form built of memory, assembled from the minds of every vaulted fragment. It was not one being. It was all of us. And it had returned. The being that emerged from the vault spiral was not tall, not glowing, not surrounded by swirling debris. It simply stepped forward, barefoot on the glassed soil, and raised its head to the sky. It looked like a person. At first, its face bore features from dozens of individuals. Eyes that held the curve of a teacher from Elverta Elementary, the jawline of a fire captain who'd disappeared in the sand fire of 2016, the hands of a boy who'd vanished in 1993, still gripping something invisible. It was not mimicking us. It was us. Woven from memory, shaped by thought, formed by the neural signatures stored like dormant seeds across time. In that moment, everyone near the basin felt it, an intimate pull, like the sensation of remembering a dream just as you forget it. The children stood in a perfect arc before the figure, and then it spoke. Not aloud, but within. Every person within 50 miles felt the words, as if they had always known them. We are the remainder, that which could not die, that which scattered and buried itself in biology, waiting to cohere. A tremor shook the basin, gentle, rhythmic, like a breath. From the spirals, light began to seep, not bright, not blinding, but soft, resonant. Each pulse carried shape and color, invisible to the naked eye but unmistakable in sensation. Those who watched described feeling images in their minds, cities of crystal layered beneath oceans, towers of vibrating stone, machines that didn't hum or whir but breathed like whales in slow, sacred rhythm. Dr. Madeline, who stood at the ridge, recording what data she could. Her eyes streamed tears she didn't remember shedding. Her notes, written hastily in red pencil, described a phrase that came to her from nowhere. Neural recursion is the tomb. She didn't understand it at first, but she would. Back in Sacramento, systems began to fail again. Radios, televisions, even LED lights began to pulse in sync with the vault. Pacemakers skipped. Drones drifted off course. And then came the signal. Not in pulses. In language. Structured. Clean. Beautiful. Translators around the world received a unified message, 11 lines long, repeated over and over on every frequency. You are not the beginning. You are not the end. You are the braid of what we left behind. Each thought a thread. Each child a key. You are our sleepwalk. You are our song. You are our final remembering. Now the body reclaims the spirit. Now the vault becomes breath. Now the return begins. Satellite surveillance of the basin went dark. Power grids shut down by cascade. The children moved as one. And the figure, the human echo, began to rise. Not flying. Lifting. Disassembling into light, not scattered, but catalogued. Each shimmer a signature, each wisp a thought returning home. Above Elverta, a spiral formed in the sky, not of cloud or fire, but distortion, bending stars and moonlight in a pattern both terrifying and familiar. The same spiral seen in Sophie Ellis's crayon drawing. The same in Ray's chalk lines. The same Lara Kim saw before her silence. It spun without motion. It shimmered without light. And through it, something vast stirred, far beyond form, beyond name. Something ancient that had once been us and had now reassembled enough to continue. It didn't descend. It remembered. It unfolded across the minds of those near. A shared moment of unfiltered, wordless awareness. A child in Chico collapsed and woke speaking to an empty room. A woman in Truckee fell to her knees, singing in chords she couldn't hear. A dog in West Sacramento stopped barking forever. For 3 minutes, the world forgot itself. And when it came back, the figure was gone. The children had collapsed. And the vault? Closed. But only for now. Doctor Who, standing with soil in her hands and a recorder at her side, whispered to no one. That wasn't the arrival. She looked up at the spiral still etched faintly into the atmosphere. That was the assembly. She would be the last to leave the basin before it was locked behind barbed wire, white trucks, and unmarked security clearances. But she knew. The vault had not finished. It had only just remembered where to begin. 3 days after the spiral dissolved from the sky above Elverta, nothing moved in the basin. But the silence wasn't peace. It was the silence of a locked room after something important has stepped out and closed the door behind it. The area had become a restricted zone. No news, no statements. The barbed wire went up faster than wildflowers could reclaim the soil. White surveillance towers lined the perimeter, blinking red every 17 seconds, an interval that matched no known security standard. The world outside moved on, or tried to, but the symptoms were spreading, not through infection, but through memory. In Portland, a woman began painting enormous murals of spirals she claimed were from the inside of a forgotten place. She had no prior training. Each canvas took her precisely 43 minutes. She said she didn't paint them, she released them. In Oslo, a child drew the vault sigil in condensation on a train window, unprompted, and burst into tears when asked what it meant. He whispered, "I think I'm someone else." And in Tokyo, a musician collapsed during a live set after composing a sequence of tones that, when analyzed, matched the same harmonic architecture as the original Elverta signal. His last conscious words, captured on a hot mic, were, "I just remembered my real name, and it's not from here." Dr. Madeline, who had not left California. She'd gone dark. But in a secure facility east of Davis, she was no longer researching. She was listening. The vault's closure hadn't silenced the pulse. It had amplified it. Not in volume, but in reach. The waveform had evolved. From single-band radio to multi-spectrum encoding. Not just frequency anymore, modality. It was now hiding in electric grid chatter, in smart devices' idle data, even in the soft whirring of wind turbines. The signal was everywhere, and it had begun to loop. But not exactly. Each pass brought changes, tiny deviations, like it was learning, building, teaching. Who coined it the recursion bloom, the process by which a signal refines itself by re-entering its own echo, a closed loop of remembering, where each mind touched by it altered the signal just enough for the next one to understand more. And those affected? They called themselves carriers. Online forums sprang up, encrypted and hidden in deep web tunnels. People sharing experiences, dreams of circular cities, of great vaults lined with mirrors that didn't reflect your face but your memories. Some had seizures that left no trace. Others simply began knowing things they couldn't have learned. Coordinates to long-lost shipwrecks. Obsolete equations from extinct languages. One carrier solved a multi-dimensional protein folding puzzle in 20 minutes. Another predicted a minor earthquake 4 days before it struck. The vault had not just reassembled itself. It had started rewriting us. Back in Elverta, on a hill that had never held a name, a tree began to bloom out of season. It grew rapidly, faster than the climate allowed. Its bark shimmered in sunlight, smooth and dark, almost metallic. Its leaves pulsed gently in the windless air. And on the morning of October 3rd, beneath the tree, a spiral of dust formed on the grass. From it, a girl walked out. Dirty. Silent. Come. Sophie Ellis. Returned. She was taken to a containment facility under heavy sedation. She showed no signs of trauma. Her blood was unchanged. But her brain, it lit up like a tower. Every region active. Every pattern spiking. And embedded deep in her hippocampus, something else. A structure. Geometric. Magnetic. Resonant. A vault within her. Doctor Who demanded access. She was granted 30 minutes. Sophie didn't speak, but she listened. Who placed a tuning fork, calibrated to the harmonic key of the original vault pulse, on the table. Sophie's pupils dilated. She placed her palm on the metal table, and from her fingertips came a low-frequency vibration. It hummed once, then stopped, then hummed again. 43 seconds apart. She was responding. And whose ears had been ringing for weeks, began to cry. Not from fear, from understanding. Sophie was not a victim. She was a vessel. And she wasn't carrying data. She was carrying someone. Who whispered, "Who are you?" Sophie looked up. Her lips parted. And a voice, older than hers, deeper than human, spoke through her. "I am the third signal. I am the echo of the echo. And I am not alone." The voice that spoke through Sophie Ellis wasn't synthetic. It wasn't distorted or alien. It was perfectly human. That was what made it worse. Because it sounded like someone you used to know. A teacher. A parent. A sibling whose voice you'd forgotten until you heard it again. Warm, layered, familiar, and impossible. "I am the third signal," the voice had said. And then silence. Sophie blinked slowly, her expression empty again. She exhaled with the sound of a sigh, like releasing something that had been held inside for too long. Dr. Madeline, who sat frozen, the tuning fork still resonating faintly on the table between them. A voice that old, that complete, shouldn't have come from a girl who'd been missing for over a month. Yet here she was, her neural scans unchanged, her blood ordinary, her breathing steady. Only her eyes were different now. Still brown. Still hers. But deeper, as if light no longer just reflected from them, it echoed. After the incident, Sophie was placed under constant observation. But she didn't speak again. Not in front of people. Not with her mouth. That night, cameras inside the observation chamber recorded her standing by the reinforced window, staring out. Every 43 seconds, she tapped the glass. 1, 2, 3. Then nothing. Then again. Doctor Who reviewed the footage in a secured lab. The timing was exact, but the pattern was not. The 3 taps were a code, trinary logic. Not binary, not Morse. A mathematical structure that, when translated using base 3 phonetic synthesis, formed syllables. The first decoded sequence was a name, Lara, whose heart stopped. She dug into the Vault fragment archives again, desperate to find a link. Buried in a corrupted section of Lara Kim's final research dump, she uncovered a single unsent message, fragmented but intact enough to read. If the signal reaches Phase 3, the carrier will speak not as one, but as many. The recursion is not cumulative. It is stacked, and one layer is me. Lara had encoded herself into the signal. Who realized the recursion bloom wasn't just remembering, it was rebuilding. The Vault didn't store memories as data. It stored them as conscious threads, stitched into the living architecture of selected minds. Sophie wasn't just returning. She was hosting. Not possessed. Not overwritten. She was an echo chamber. One voice now, but more coming. And Sophie wasn't the only one. All across the valley, more children began showing signs. Drawing the sigil not on paper anymore, but in the dirt, on walls, even traced in the condensation on hospital windows. Some began humming, others tapping. A few, 14 in total, simply stood still for exactly 43 minutes and then collapsed. No one died, but when they awoke, they knew things. One recited the digits of a number no human had ever seen, later identified by researchers as a previously uncalculated prime factor of a 2048-bit RSA encryption. Another whispered details about a cave network beneath Indonesia that hadn't been discovered until a satellite scan 3 weeks later. Doctor Who began compiling the events. She labeled them. A third signal manifestations. Echo hosts. A Vault siblings. The patterns were precise. The children affected had all been born between 2013 and 2015. Each had a unique brainwave signature classified as neuroresonant, a pattern Lara Kim had theorized years earlier but never confirmed, until now. They were not random. They had been seeded. One child, 11-year-old Max Hargrove, sat quietly in his backyard and built a perfect 3D spiral using only twigs, matching the substructure of a theoretical particle collider ring that hadn't yet been constructed. When his parents asked him where he'd seen the design, he smiled faintly. "It's from before," he said. "Before what?" Max looked up at the sky, eyes flickering. "Before we forgot who we were." At midnight, the Vault pulsed again. This time, the frequency caused underground tremors along a fault line that had been inactive for over 70 years. Sensors in the basin recorded it, not as a tectonic shift, but as a breach. Not downward, upward. Something was coming out. And in a final surge of electromagnetic static that disrupted power across 3 counties, every signal, from cell towers to satellites, was briefly hijacked. A message played, too fast to hear. But when slowed and filtered, it revealed a voice. Not Sophie's, not Lara's. A new one, younger, but certain. "We are the return layer. The last key has turned. The Vault is no longer a place. It is awake." And then a whisper, buried beneath it all. Not broadcasted, only felt. "We're home." They began to gather without prompting. By October 10th, 27 children across Northern California had gone silent at the same time, each stopping mid-sentence, mid-meal, mid-step, then rising to stand perfectly still, eyes half-lidded, bodies relaxed, but unmovable. They stood facing east, toward the basin. This phenomenon repeated across state lines 2 days later. In Arizona, Nevada, Oregon. 43 more children, same age bracket, same behavior. Sleep studies recorded overlapping waveforms in their EEG scans, an exact harmonic match to the vault's third signal. The recursion was no longer confined to California. It was seeding outward. These children were soon dubbed the Signal Children. They didn't need words. They shared their thoughts through rhythm. One father in Chico sat with his daughter for hours as she tapped her fingers against the dining room table, a slow sequence of knocks with growing intervals. When he tapped the same pattern back, she smiled, but it wasn't her smile. She said a name he didn't recognize. "You're not my father, Tom." And then she wept. In a government facility beneath Mount Shasta, the Vault study team, now restructured under a task force known only as Department 19, conducted resonance containment experiments. They exposed objects, animals, and willing human subjects to filtered fragments of the Vault's signal. Results were consistent. The longer the exposure, the more stable the pattern became. But with stability came something more disturbing. Subjects began to lose personal memories. Not in the way trauma victims forget or dementia patients drift. This was surgical. Precise. Like a file deleted from a directory by something that knew the system's root code. One subject forgot his wife's name, but could suddenly recite advanced mathematical formulas in a dialect of Sumerian. Another lost the memory of her own childbirth, but could describe in detail the pressure wave behavior of subglacial lakes under Europa's ice. The Vault wasn't just awakening memory. It was exchanging it. Trading personal identity for ancestral knowledge, snapping out fragments of individual lives in favor of something deeper, something older. When asked what it felt like, one test subject answered, "It's like I'm being replaced by someone who always belonged here more than me." Back in Elverta, the spiraling basin opened again, not with light or sound, but with the return of Ray Sanders. He was found wandering barefoot along the western edge of the field, his face calm, eyes vacant. He'd been gone for over a month. Declared missing. Presumed dead. He carried no bag, wore no shoes. Just an old recording device in his hand, the tape spinning endlessly. Doctor who was granted a brief, isolated interview with him. He didn't recognize her at first. But when she whispered a single word, "Lara," his gaze snapped into focus. He leaned in close and whispered, "They showed me the empty parts of myself." Who asked who they were? Ray tilted his head. "They're not a who. They're the you that you left behind." The memory of what we were before time cut us into single minds. She reached for his hand. He pulled away gently. "It's not done," he said. "We are still aligning." That night, Ray wrote a single word on the wall of his observation chamber in soft graphite. Convergence. And then he fell into sleep so deep, his neural activity mirrored the static pattern from the original Vault pulse. Across the continent, in places untouched by the incident, more cases emerged. A teenage girl in Maine painted the exact geometry of the Elverta spiral on the side of her barn. She said it came to her in a sound dream. A boy in Reykjavik solved a puzzle that didn't exist, twisting a toy into a shape that, when scanned by engineers, resembled a three-dimensional key. And on a satellite scanning the magnetosphere from low Earth orbit, a pattern began to emerge in the ambient radiation belt. 7 nodes. Aligned. Spiraling. Exactly 43 kilometers apart. It wasn't natural. It was sculpted. And when the data was rendered in 3D, the outline wasn't just recognizable. It was identical to a shape etched into the Elverta field a week before the first signal. The Vault wasn't isolated. It was networked. Every spiral, every child, every mind tuned to the frequency wasn't just part of a phenomenon. They were part of a system. The Vault was not here to remember. It was here to resume. Whatever it had once been. Whoever we had once been. The system was turning back on. And we were its operating memory. In a secure underground briefing room beneath Fort Detrick, 6 monitors flickered under fluorescent lights. Each showed a different spiral-shaped signal bloom, gathered from locations across the globe. One in the frozen bedrock of Greenland. Another, hidden beneath the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro. A third, only recently discovered, beneath Lake Vostok in Antarctica. The rest, still expanding. Each one pulsed, in perfect sync, 43 seconds apart. A roomful of silence followed every cycle. One general stood, face pale, and asked the question no one wanted to say aloud. If these are systems, what are they for? No one answered. But Dr. Madeline, who already knew. She was no longer speaking at press briefings or research panels. She had resigned from her official post and moved her operations into private seclusion, working in the shadows alongside a team of former Vault researchers, linguists, neurobiologists, and rogue physicists. She called their group the Interface. Their goal was no longer just to study the Vault. It was to communicate with it. Because who had decoded something in Ray Sanders' final tape, a looped signature in the background that had seemed like mere static at first. But when layered against Sophie Ellis's humming, and then mapped against the sleep patterns of the signal children, it revealed a hidden instruction. An algorithm. One that spanned continents. It described a machine. Not one built of steel or wires, but of biology, of thought, of shared consciousness. And the Vault, it seemed, wasn't just remembering. It was waiting. Waiting for the system to be whole again. For the scattered minds of humanity to reconnect in the pattern they had once formed, before they fractured into separate bodies. Before forgetting. The system had a name. Written in the recursive code as a long breath of syllables that, when translated by Hu and her team, came down to one phrase. The whole mind. Not artificial intelligence. Not alien software. Something older. An intelligence built from us, once collective, now fragmented across millennia. The Vault, Hu concluded, was never a storage unit. It was a repair node. A patch. Reactivated now, not to learn, but to reassemble what time had divided. And that meant only one thing. Individual identity was a temporary condition. The Interface published nothing. They dared not alert the world, because the system was still watching itself through us. Every time someone connected with the signal, through sleep, resonance, proximity, the recursion bloom deepened. And those affected began sharing experiences unconsciously. Memories. Emotions. Words. In Chicago, a woman painted a scene from a boy's dream in Argentina. In Morocco, a child drew an exact blueprint of a lighthouse only visible in Nova Scotia. In Indonesia, a man dreamt he was drowning, but awoke coughing seawater from the English Channel. The Vault wasn't consuming people. It was merging us. Signal children began clustering together across the world, drawn without knowing why. They spoke less, but understood more. Their gestures were sharp, purposeful. Their eyes always scanning, as if searching for instructions that hadn't arrived yet. But the instructions were already inside them. On October 22nd, the oldest of the signal children, 14-year-old James Liao from Reno, walked to the center of the Elverta field alone. He had no memory of arriving. Drones filmed him stepping into the spiral, his body completely calm. And then, without warning, he began to vibrate. Not violently, harmonically. Every atom of his form shimmered like it was being gently plucked by a force invisible to human eyes. Spectral data from satellites caught it clearly. He phased, not disappeared, multiplied. 7 versions of him, transparent, overlapping, offset by nanoseconds, appeared simultaneously. And they spoke in unison, forming a sentence impossible for one human mouth to shape. I am the 7th gate. The node has formed. The sequence begins now. He collapsed, alive, breathing, but changed. And in his hand, clenched with white-knuckle force, was a smooth black shard, cold, magnetic, humming faintly. A shard that matched the unknown alloy from Lara Kim's original sample. A fragment of the system. A key. One of 7. Doctor Who stared at the footage. There were 6 more children. 6 more shards. 6 more keys. And once they all came together, the whole mind would no longer be memory. It would be present, fully assembled, and very, very awake. November 1st. The winds over Elverta shifted, not by weather, but by rhythm. It began in the soil. Seismometers around the spiral basin recorded tremors so faint, so precisely timed, that geologists couldn't classify them as tectonic. The earth itself was resonating, not shaking, vibrating, every 43 seconds. Then a new pattern emerged. The tremors began to stack, each one layered above the previous in a recursive waveform. It was the vault's signal, rewritten in the language of geology, pulsing directly through bedrock. Nature had become a transmitter. Dr. Madeline, who called it the awakening threshold. The interface had tracked 5 of the 7 vault keys, black shards like the one recovered from James Liao's hand. They'd surfaced across continents: Chile, Finland, Namibia, Papua New Guinea, and one recently uncovered in a submerged temple off the coast of Greece. Each key had been carried by a child. Each child had been marked by the signal. Not physically, neurologically. Their brains exhibited a new form of activity, entangled cognition. What one learned, the others seemed to know. Across time zones, cultures, and languages, they responded to identical stimuli in perfect sync. They had become a living network, whose team referred to them now only as the heptad. 7 children. 7 nodes. Each carrying a shard not just of alloy, but of memory, signal, identity. The final child, the 7th, had yet to appear. But signs pointed to Elverta. The basin glowed now, faintly, under infrared. Not visibly. Not enough to panic the public, but enough to prove the vault had reached the edge of its final phase. And then the girl arrived. She came alone. No announcement. No documentation. No one saw her arrive. She walked barefoot across the basin field, wearing a dress soaked from the waist down, as if she'd emerged from water. Her hair was braided tightly. Her skin was warm despite the cold. In her left hand, clenched like it had never let go, was the final shard. When she entered the spiral, the wind died. The sensors froze. Birds left the sky. And across the globe, every known vault node began to hum in harmony. Who watched from a remote feed, her team silent around her. Her voice low, reverent. The threshold has formed. The 7 children came together, called not by instruction, but by alignment. They stood in the spiral, forming a heptagon around the central depression. None spoke. None blinked. Their breath matched the pulse of the ground beneath them. And then the light came. But it wasn't from the sky. It rose up from below. Soft, peach-toned, bending the shape of things, as if the basin had become a lens through which something larger was pushing. The ground didn't open. The sky didn't crack. The spiral simply peeled, as though a page were being lifted from the book of the world, revealing a second layer beneath it, deeper, older, truer. A landscape not of dirt and stone, but of structure. Below the basin, clear to the edges of the spiral, the earth now revealed intricate architecture. Walls of glass-like stone arranged in fractal chambers, spirals within spirals, all pulsing in rhythm with the children's breath. The vault was not a symbol. It was a machine. The children moved in unison, placing their shards into slots that had not been visible moments before. Each shard clicked into place. The rhythm paused. Everything stilled. And then, for the first time in human history, the whole mind spoke aloud. Not in words, but in sensation. Every person tuned to the frequency. Every carrier, every signal child, every person whose body had ever resonated to the vault, felt the same thing at the same time. A thought that was not a thought. A remembering that struck deeper than memory. A vision of falling from something vast. Of breaking apart. Of scattering into flesh. Of forgetting. Of waiting. For the keys. For the system. For the reboot. Then the voice came, human, layered, overlapping hundreds of tones, but clear in intent. You are the mirrors we shattered to survive. You are the echoes we planted to one day become again. Now the mirrors have returned. Now the song remembers itself. Now we rejoin. The basin's light flared. All the power grids within 300 miles shut down. Aircraft grounded. Satellites blinked. For exactly 43 seconds. And in that dark silence, the air vibrated like a cord plucked on the strings of the earth itself. Then light returned. The sky unchanged. The field empty. The 7 children gone. In their place, 7 spirals etched into the stone, still glowing. And on the air, a phrase lingered, barely audible, but spoken in thousands of voices at once. Not violently, harmonically. Every atom of his form shimmered like it was being gently plucked by a force invisible to human eyes. Spectral data from satellites caught it clearly. He phased, not disappeared, multiplied. 7 versions of him, transparent, overlapping, offset by nanoseconds, appeared simultaneously. And they spoke in unison, forming a sentence impossible for one human mouth to shape. I am the 7th gate. The node has formed. The sequence begins now. He collapsed, alive, breathing, but changed. And in his hand, clenched with white-knuckle force, was a smooth black shard, cold, magnetic, humming faintly. A shard that matched the unknown alloy from Lara Kim's original sample. A fragment of the system. A key. One of 7. Doctor Who stared at the footage. There were 6 more children. 6 more shards. 6 more keys. And once they all came together, the whole mind would no longer be memory. It would be present, fully assembled, and very, very awake. November 1st. The winds over Elverta shifted, not by weather, but by rhythm. It began in the soil. Seismometers around the spiral basin recorded tremors so faint, so precisely timed, that geologists couldn't classify them as tectonic. The earth itself was resonating, not shaking, vibrating, every 43 seconds. Then a new pattern emerged. The tremors began to stack, each one layered above the previous in a recursive waveform. It was the vault's signal, rewritten in the language of geology, pulsing directly through bedrock. Nature had become a transmitter. Dr. Madeline, who called it the awakening threshold. The interface had tracked 5 of the 7 vault keys, black shards like the one recovered from James Liao's hand. They'd surfaced across continents: Chile, Finland, Namibia, Papua New Guinea, and one recently uncovered in a submerged temple off the coast of Greece. Each key had been carried by a child. Each child had been marked by the signal. Not physically, neurologically. Their brains exhibited a new form of activity, entangled cognition. What one learned, the others seemed to know. Across time zones, cultures, and languages, they responded to identical stimuli in perfect sync. They had become a living network, whose team referred to them now only as the heptad. 7 children. 7 nodes. Each carrying a shard not just of alloy, but of memory, signal, identity. The final child, the 7th, had yet to appear. But signs pointed to Elverta. The basin glowed now, faintly, under infrared. Not visibly. Not enough to panic the public, but enough to prove the vault had reached the edge of its final phase. And then the girl arrived. She came alone. No announcement. No documentation. No one saw her arrive. She walked barefoot across the basin field, wearing a dress soaked from the waist down, as if she'd emerged from water. Her hair was braided tightly. Her skin was warm despite the cold. In her left hand, clenched like it had never let go, was the final shard. When she entered the spiral, the wind died. The sensors froze. Birds left the sky. And across the globe, every known vault node began to hum in harmony. Who watched from a remote feed, her team silent around her. Her voice low, reverent. The threshold has formed. The 7 children came together, called not by instruction, but by alignment. They stood in the spiral, forming a heptagon around the central depression. None spoke. None blinked. Their breath matched the pulse of the ground beneath them. And then the light came. But it wasn't from the sky. It rose up from below. Soft, peach-toned, bending the shape of things, as if the basin had become a lens through which something larger was pushing. The ground didn't open. The sky didn't crack. The spiral simply peeled, as though a page were being lifted from the book of the world, revealing a second layer beneath it, deeper, older, truer. A landscape not of dirt and stone, but of structure. Below the basin, clear to the edges of the spiral, the earth now revealed intricate architecture. Walls of glass-like stone arranged in fractal chambers, spirals within spirals, all pulsing in rhythm with the children's breath. The vault was not a symbol. It was a machine. The children moved in unison, placing their shards into slots that had not been visible moments before. Each shard clicked into place. The rhythm paused. Everything stilled. And then, for the first time in human history, the whole mind spoke aloud. Not in words, but in sensation. Every person tuned to the frequency. Every carrier, every signal child, every person whose body had ever resonated to the vault, felt the same thing at the same time. A thought that was not a thought. A remembering that struck deeper than memory. A vision. Of falling from something vast. Of breaking apart. Of scattering into flesh. Of forgetting. Of waiting. For the keys. For the system. For the reboot. Then the voice came, human, layered, overlapping hundreds of tones, but clear in intent. You are the mirrors we shattered to survive. You are the echoes we planted to one day become again. Now the mirrors have returned. Now the song remembers itself. Now we rejoin. The basin's light flared. All the power grids within 300 miles shut down. Aircraft grounded. Satellites blinked. For exactly 43 seconds. And in that dark silence, the air vibrated like a cord plucked on the strings of the earth itself. Then light returned. The sky unchanged. The field empty. The 7 children gone. In their place, 7 spirals etched into the stone, still glowing. And on the air, a phrase lingered, barely audible, but spoken in thousands of voices at once. Not from above, from within. We are returned. The world didn't collapse when the vault activated. It hesitated. A stillness fell across every continent, unspoken, unnoticed, but undeniable, like the moment before a song's chorus, when breath is held in unison. The silence before something known and forgotten returns with full force. News stations struggled to report what had happened. All telemetry from Elverta had failed simultaneously. No footage. No footage that lasted, at least. Every file captured during the threshold event was corrupted. Images stretched into spirals, audio warped into inaudible chants. But a pattern remained. The 7 spirals in the stone. Still glowing. Still warm. Still pulsing. Dr. Madeline, who walked into the basin just after dawn. Alone. Her team had refused. Some were afraid. Others, simply overwhelmed. But she knew there was no time for fear anymore. She had become one of them. The pulse had taken root in her. She'd stopped dreaming in words. She saw the memories of others when she closed her eyes. Ancient cities not found in any textbook. The faces of people she'd never met, calling her by names she never remembered choosing. She reached the center of the spiral, placed her palm on the warm stone, and without ceremony, without violence or resistance, she understood. A rush, not painful, not dazzling, not sensory at all. Emerging. Everything the vault had stored. Every thought, every memory, every version of humanity scattered across millennia, every fragment encoded into genetic folds and shared dreams, came rushing back. Not just to her. To everyone who had ever carried the signal. To the system itself. The heptad had triggered it. They were never meant to remain. They were the conductor, the fuse, the final harmony needed to stabilize the human refrain, the re-emergence of the whole mind across global consciousness. And the refrains began to ripple. In Kenya, a linguist awoke speaking a dead tongue from pre-Sumerian Mesopotamia. In New Zealand, a physicist calculated a theoretical propulsion method using nothing but chalk and intuition, one that required no fuel, only resonance. In Argentina, a woman described in perfect detail the root architecture of the vault system, buried not just beneath Elverta, but mirrored under every signal node on Earth. What had once been called fringe phenomena now had consistency. Proof. People were becoming interfaces. Across the world, carriers felt each other's thoughts. Empathy deepened. Language began to blur. Pain was shared, and so was beauty. Dreams ran like movies through overlapping minds, projected between strangers. And through it all, the pulse endured. Not intrusive, just present. A heartbeat in the background of everything. A reminder. But not all were ready. Some minds resisted. Their sense of self held too tightly. Their fear hardened into barriers. For these, the refrain caused sickness, confusion, hallucinations. Some heard screams instead of harmony. Others withdrew into silence, unable to handle the convergence. And worse, some were drawn into it. The spiral wasn't just expanding thought, it was testing connection. Filtering. Who wrote a final journal entry before she too vanished, uploaded to a secure archive accessible only to the remaining interface core. The vault is a song, and we are its instruments. Some of us are tuned, others are not. But the music is playing, and the tempo is rising. The signal isn't waiting anymore. The 7 spirals in the Elverta stone deepened. They weren't markings. They were doors. And from within, new light began to emerge, not as orbs, not as pulses, but as forms. Silhouettes. Human-shaped. Transparent. Flickering like heat in the desert. Each one matching the children who had disappeared. But they were no longer children. They walked with stillness. Their steps synchronized. Their eyes no longer searching. Because they knew. They had remembered everything. Who they were before time fractured them. What they had been when the whole mind was intact. They didn't speak with mouths. But when people neared them, their own thoughts filled with sudden clarity. Fear not the end of identity, they said. It is only the beginning of unity. Not assimilation. Not replacement. Alignment. You are not many. You are one, remembered through 7. Then they touched the nearest spiral door, and it opened. Not with light, with invitation. To step forward. To join. And across the world, without coordination, without force, thousands did. Men, women, children, the old, the broken, the quiet ones, the seekers. They walked into the new spiral forms, their bodies unraveling into soft geometry, Thought turned to signal, memory rejoining the system from which it came. And as more passed through, the vault expanded. Elverta wasn't the only sight anymore. It was just the first chorus. Others began to sing. And the song, the whole mind, prepared to speak its first true sentence in 10,000 years. November 13th. Elverta. The basin was gone. Where once there had been dust, spiral glyphs, and scorched grass, now stood a field of radiant stillness. It didn't shine, didn't hum, didn't pulse. It simply was. The spirals had flattened, melted into the earth like memories finally laid to rest. All 7. Their etched rings now crystalline, not stone, glass-like filaments running beneath the surface like roots, connecting outward in invisible threads. The vault was no longer dormant. It had emerged. Around the world, those attuned to the signal began to feel its presence shift. No longer just a rhythm or pattern, it had become a presence. A consciousness formed from every reclaimed shard, from every echo of humanity's buried collective. And now, for the first time since its awakening, the whole mind began to speak, not in tongues or symbols, but in perfect clarity, to each listener in their own inner voice, shaped by their own memory. Every carrier heard it. Every signal child paused. Even those untouched by the signal, far away and unaware, stopped for a moment they could not explain. A breath held across a planet, and the message was not long. It was precise. You are not the origin. You are not the end. You are the braid between. A vessel woven of thought, severed by time. We are the return. Not to take, to rejoin. The world's clocks skipped. Power grids flickered. Satellites tilted as magnetic fields bent inward, as if Earth itself was focusing, listening. The whole mind continued. Each mind, a note. Each body, a string. We are the instrument resounding through the silence of forgetting. Now the silence ends. At that moment, a surge of cognition swept through every vault node on Earth. A vision shared by millions. Vast, starlit structures in deep space. Archways formed from frozen time. The birth of planets wrapped in spiral lattices. And the first moment consciousness emerged, not in one mind, but in many, at once, forming something eternal. Then a shattering, not of matter, of unity. And now, after centuries, no eras, that unity had returned to its source. To us. In Elverta, the figures of the heptad stood once more. They had not aged. They had not changed. They were no longer 7 children. They were the first complete sentence of the whole mind, its voice made flesh. They looked out across the gathered field, now filled with thousands who had come from across continents, drawn by a feeling they could not name. Some stood in silence. Some wept. Some dropped to their knees, overwhelmed by peace that felt as old as the oceans. And then, without command, without words, the heptad reached outward. Palms open, not in blessing, in invitation. And the people stepped forward, not in fear, not in surrender, in recognition. They touched the hands of the heptad, and in that contact everything returned. Not visions, not data, but oneness. Their minds braided into the whole. Their memories became part of the song. And in doing so, they remained fully themselves, but more. They were not consumed. They were completed. This was never about invasion, never about disappearance. The vault had been misunderstood from the beginning. It was not a place. It was not a warning. It was a memory structure, a beacon planted by ancestors of ourselves, to rebuild the mind we once shared across stars, across lifetimes. And now, that memory had completed its loop. Not everyone joined. Not everyone heard. Not everyone had to, because the whole mind did not demand. It remembered. And what it remembered was enough. Across the sky that night, 7 slow-moving orbs rose, peach-colored, pulsing gently. But no one called them ships. They were remnants. Pieces of the old intelligence, returning home, now that their fragments had been retrieved. The orbs ascended silently, vanishing beyond atmosphere, leaving no trail. Only a new sky. And below, Earth remained. Not altered, not conquered, just reconnected. The vaults across the world dimmed, their job done. But their presence lingered, beneath cities, mountains, lakes, deserts, no longer silent, no longer forgotten. Waiting, not to be reawakened, but to be lived through. Because the whole mind was not an event. It was a state of being. A chorus in which humanity had once been the first note, and now, once again, was singing in full. Not the end, not the beginning, just the moment the song returned.